Come on, technology. George, are you there?
I was at the camera lined up. I could see her.
you are you are audio only, so they can only hear you, but they can see me. Okay?
Oh, got it. Perfect, perfect. You know, I accidentally set up a Periscope live feed, and I was sitting on a couch staring into the abyss. So,
All right. Well, we got it now. So
perfect.
sounds like you might be a little far away from your microphone. So
How
if
about
you could
now?
be a
Is
little
this better?
closer.
Can you hear me better
Oh,
now?
that's way better. Way better. All right. Now, George, I think most of my audience will recognize your name immediately, and I'll say what the book text says when I look for your book, Deep State Target: How I Got Caught in the Crosshairs of the Plot to Bring Down President Trump. Um, and you were advisor to President Trump's presidential campaign and the first campaign, and you got pulled into something, and you wrote a book about it. And by the way, I just looked at the reviews of your book. Oh my God, you have good reviews. I don't know if I've seen too many books that have 86% five-star reviews. That's crazy. I
That's
mean, I've written a few books, and that's crazy. So congratulations on that.
Thank you, thank you.
So, George, our big problem is that we got people who probably know the details and some don't. Can you give us the briefest outline of what happened to you and therefore kicked off the book?
Absolutely, and thanks a lot for having me, Scott. It's a great pleasure. So basically, I had worked in DC for 5 years, leading up to joining both Ben Carson's presidential campaign and then Donald Trump's presidential campaign. A lot of people forget that I actually joined Ben Carson's campaign first. And at that time, clearly the deck was stacked against all the Republican candidates. Even when I was on Ben Carson's campaign, there were clear animus by the Obama administration, State Department officials, you name it. They were all either looking to what these candidates were up to, who their teams were, or find ways to basically infiltrate their campaigns. And we saw that happen with Donald Trump's campaign more vivid than any other campaign. And as soon as I joined Donald Trump's campaign, that's exactly when it seems the world's intelligence community collapsed on my lap while I was living in Europe for the first month I was on the campaign, and they were targeting myself, General Flynn, Carter Page, others, and it just really was concerted efforts by not only the Obama administration, but I also argue in my book of foreign governments who had vested interests in a Clinton presidency that wanted to shut down the Trump campaign and to assure that if he did end up getting elected, that he would be handcuffed. And that's exactly what we've lived through as a country the last 2 years.
Now, tell us without all the details, because it's kind of hard to compress it all. What was the first sketchy contact with another person that you had, which was clearly some kind of an intelligence uh, or something that was just sketchy? Who was the first person who contacted you?
Before the Post even knew that I had publicly joined the Trump campaign, a very shady operative who is now at the center of probably 3 different investigations, Mifsud, made contact with me in Italy. So this happened in early March, and then if who's ever read my book or who knows the story somewhat will see that individual who then introduces me to the fake niece of Vladimir Putin. He begins to try and infiltrate the campaign through me. He eventually tells me that I have Hillary's emails, and now he's gone underground for the last couple of years, and he's at the center of the Durham investigation.
Now, what is his nationality?
This is a Maltese individual. I believe he's a dual Italian Maltese native who had very few, if any, ties to Russia, overwhelmingly tied to the US government, to the British government, and other NATO governments
No.
on the
Now,
continent.
now, early on, the first time he contacted you, did you not sort of Google him and say there might be something a little fishy going on here? At what point did you realize there was something not right about him?
Well, actually, the way that I was reeled in was exactly because he wasn't overtly fishy initially. When you Google this guy initially, you'll see that he was a professor. He was connected to the State Department, to various governments in Europe, and he had really no connections whatsoever to any hostile power. So when I first met him, that's how I actually was reeled in to meet him. And shortly thereafter, that's when his motives seemed to be far more sketchy.
So would you say that it is a fact that the Obama administration, quote, spied on the campaign, or would you say that that requires some nuance?
We have to remember that there's an active criminal investigation looking into the so-called spying. The Durham probe evolved into a criminal matter once information about this individual, Joseph Mifsud, was relayed to Barr's office by the Italian government. Now, we also have evidence that various spies were sent to meet with General Flynn, myself, others on the campaign, and Stefan Halper, who is one of these spies, actually tried to ingratiate himself within the transition team. So clearly there was spying going on against the campaign. The question now is not if there was spying, but was it illegal? And we've already seen a guilty plea on the other side.
And is there anything that you know that would connect it to Obama or Biden personally, or do you just know in terms of that connection what you've seen in the news like the rest of us?
What I know is that the type of foreign governments and foreign officials that were involved in my story, from governments like the EU, Italy, these governments are not acting alone, and they're not working to set up Americans abroad, working for presidential campaigns. That just doesn't happen. Clearly instructed to do it by the U.S. government. The question is, how high up did it go? We know with the recent unmasking of General Flynn that Vice President Joe Biden was directly involved in the unmasking of him, which was an illegal act. Was Biden and Obama involved in unmasking other people, possibly Trump himself? That's something that Attorney General Barr and John Durham still have not exposed. That's something that I think we will be seeing moving forward.
If you had to guess how this is going to end up when Durham is done, what do you think is the outcome that we should expect?
I think
Let's say, let me ask it differently. If Durham really got the goods so that there was no doubt about what happened, what would be the outcome?
the outcome, and I've said this for a long time now, is that I think Durham is looking into a conspiracy case, a potential RICO case that involves a conspiracy to not only fabricate evidence and scenarios around Trump campaign associates, but to then utilize that fake evidence to not only spy on the campaign. We now know that the FBI lied to the FISA court in order to obtain those warrants against Carter Page and others. And moving forward, we're also going to see if treason was committed, as the president himself calls it, because subverting
How,
democracy and interfering in the democratic process in this country is treason. And if anyone was treason at the highest level in it, they will be held accountable. And that's something I predict.
Now, how do you rule out the other hypothesis, which is that the folks who did all of this had a genuine concern about Russia, and they couldn't really know if there was anything there until they dug into it. So that would be their claim. How do you know their intentions versus what they did? Because what they did could be spun either way, wouldn't you say?
That's a great question, and I would agree with you if there were true suspicious links between the campaign and a foreign hostile power. But in the case, especially in my case, and which is at the center of the Durham probe, they're looking to see if this was fabricated, if the entire story known as Russiagate was a fake manifestation that you would find a Hollywood screenwriter coming up with. And that's why this Joseph Mifsud, who was at the center of the Mueller report, the Horowitz report, where they were calling him dingling the Russian emails to me, as I mentioned earlier, if he was really working with the CIA and other friendly governments. Now, if that is
No,
indeed
but
proven,
suppose,
yes.
yeah. Now, but suppose, and I'm just speculating here, imagining what the defense or the explanation would be on the other side. Suppose they said we had real concerns about Trump and Russia because we heard he had investments, and therefore if there's a money link, that's a real concern. But we didn't know how to get at that, so we went through a side door by sort of creating a situation. But really, it was to find out if there really was something. because we suspect it was. We just couldn't get at it directly. Now, I don't know if that'd be legal or illegal, but suppose they said that. How could you disprove that intention? Because that's sort of a mental state.
Well, we've seen actual consequences of their attempt to circumvent the law and to do what I believe is illegal action, where you had this FBI lawyer, Kevin Kline, essentially write that Carter Page is not a CIA asset. He's working with the Russians, so let's spy on him and by extension target the rest of the campaign. We saw,
Well,
yeah.
let's accept that. Let's say they confess. Yeah, we fudged some things. We lied on the investigative stuff, but our intention was just to get us something that we thought was real. Yeah, we broke some rules, we cut some corners, but our intention was to find something real. We just went through this weird side door that we really shouldn't have. What if they say that?
Well, the beauty of our country is that we have a constitution and the rule of law, and you also require an adequate predicate to launch either a counterintelligence or a criminal investigation into an American citizen. That citizens are
Right.
protected by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and this is something
So,
that
but
yeah.
George, but George, that part we could prove. We could prove that they did or did not break those laws, and I think it'll be easy to prove that they did break those laws, and that can't be overlooked. But how do you improve their intention? Because it all boils down to what they were thinking when they did it, right?
Well, it does, and that's why we are now only recently unearthing declassified documents. People like Senator Lindsey Graham, who have showcased that people like Bill Priestip, this high-level FBI attorney, lied under oath, where he said idea about the subsource of steel and that we verified everything. And this information that we had no idea even existed, that even the Senate didn't know existed, is only now forth, and it's essentially exposing their corruption and possible illegal action. And that's exactly why Richard Grenell did such a duty to the American public by doing so much of this, and what the Director of National Intelligence currently, Ratcliffe, is doing as well.
So the logic then is that with so much cover up, the fact that we know there was cover ups, we know there was bad behavior to get this going, that there's so much of it and so many people were involved that it's just hard to write it off as people with good intentions. Is that basically there's just too much evidence to assume that they're all working with good intentions? It would be sort of unlikely. Is that where we're at?
And that's exactly what I think, and I think you're absolutely correct here. I think they try to pass accountability and any wrongdoing simply to Kevin Kleinsmith, this FBI attorney. But shortly after his guilty plea, like I mentioned, Lindsey Graham went public and stated that he's bringing in other FBI officials now that they've learned new information that they did not know, that clearly demonstrates that they lied under oath and that this could not simply have been a coincidence. It looks like a concerted effort to undermine a rival presidential campaign. And that's what is at the heart of this new investigation.
All right, and what in your book that I said has amazing reviews? I mean, I'm really impressed. If you
Thank
look
you.
at, I read a number of the 5-star reviews, and they're quite blown away by your book. So congratulations on that. So it's called Deep State Target. And if you want a link to it, I tweeted it out. So look at the top of my Twitter feed today if you want to get a copy of that. What would be in your book that you think would be one thing that the general public, unless they were really, really looking into it, but just the general public who's following the story, what is it that they don't know? Is there a fact that you know that may or may not be in the book that would just blow people's mind? They just sort of don't know it.
Argue, and I think I lay it out very strategically from A to Z in my book, that the old narrative was that the Trump campaign was colluding to win. Argue, and I lay out with facts, and I think daily and monthly those facts are now being corroborated by new declassified information, is that not only did the Trump campaign not collude with any foreign governments or with the US government for that matter, but the Obama administration colluded not only with the Clinton campaign, but with foreign governments to the Trump campaign. And that's exactly why it's so difficult for people to understand what happened, because I'm showcasing a different, which is based in reality and which is being based on facts being declassified. Yet for 3 years, the mainstream media kept people essentially deluded and unable to understand the reality of the situation. And that's why it's
Yeah.
so, it's almost like a shock and awe effect when people really start to find out what really happened. And I don't blame them. I lived
So,
the story and I'm still shocked.
so George, from the first moment I started hearing the story and Christopher Steele and and X spook, I said to myself, "There's no such thing as an X spy. That's not a real thing. There's nobody who's an ex-spy, because they always know your name. They know who you are. They know you got some connections, some favors. You're never really an ex-spy." And I thought, well, when is the press going to tell me that Great Britain is highly culpable in this whole thing? And I kept waiting, and they kept presenting evidence that Great Britain was involved, but they never said it. And I kept saying, well, why don't you say what's obvious, that Great Britain had to be involved in this? Am I wrong? Was Great Britain involved in this in terms of intelligence-wise helping the United States, or is that not a fact?
Scott, you're absolutely correct. And in my book, what I do is, because remember, I was based in the first month I was on the Trump campaign, and what was the number one issue that the UK was dealing with at that time that the candidate was very supportive of, and that was Brexit. The establishment at that time clearly had a motivation to find out what Trump and his team were up to, considering how outspoken Trump was for Brexit. To this day, you see how sensitive the issue is in the UK. And the president, and I should say the candidate, when he would speak about Brexit, and I would meet with UK officials, they were extremely hostile. I was speaking to Iran at that point about how dangerous the candidate was to British interests around the world. And that's why I'm not surprised,
But
and not surprised that Christopher Steele was British, Alexander Downer was connected to
right,
MI6, Stefan Helper was connected to MI6, Richard Dearlove was
right,
connected to MI6, and it's
right.
another example of it can't be a coincidence, as you mentioned earlier.
And but wasn't there? Correct me on this. Wasn't there some interest, or Great Britain certainly would have been concerned that Trump was going to be too friendly to Russia, which would be a gigantic security concern for anybody in the vicinity of Europe. So do you think that was part of it? Just they didn't want a president who they thought, perhaps mistakenly, would be a little too friendly to Russia?
If that's the case, and I don't know, I can't, and I only speak about facts, and when I would speak with the UK government at that time, they were very concerned with Brexit more so than regarding Russia. Now, if that was indeed the case, they probably forgot something over the last 100 years, actually 200 years of American history, and that's that the president foreign policy in this country. Not the diplomats, not the bureaucrats, not the unelected, but the president. And they would have seen a predictable individual who from day one, going as far back as 2015, stated that having a working relationship with Russia and a more, I guess, confrontational relationship with China is in the U.S. interest. And that's exactly what's been playing out for the last couple of years, and it's actually
Right.
safeguarding U.S. interests throughout the world.
All right, so this is fascinating. I'm going to get on to some other topics here, George, but thank you so much for joining. If anybody's joining late, check out George Papadopoulos' book, Deep State Target, How I Got Caught in the Crosshairs of the Plot to Bring Down President Trump. As I said, the reviews for this book are just off the chart. So it sounds like you should get that and take a good read. Thanks, George. Thanks for
Thank you.
joining me.
Thank you, Scott.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.